the child whisperer who couldn't hear her own daughter. Dr. Vivian Hartley had built her reputation on one principle: no child should suffer in silence while adults fail to notice. She'd removed children from dangerous homes, prosecuted abusive parents, and testified in court about the importance of recognizing warning signs. But when her own 17-year-old daughter Autumn attempted suicide in their bathroom, Vivian realized she had become the very adult she'd spent her career criticizing. Welcome to Justice System USA, where we explore the human complexities behind America's social safety net. I'm your host, and today we're examining a story that asks, can professional expertise blind us to what's happening in our own homes? Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, and if you believe these difficult stories need to be told. Subscribe and join our community that isn't afraid to face uncomfortable truths. The expert who saved everyone, Dr. Vivian Hartley, was considered the most gifted child protection specialist in the Pacific Northwest. At 46, she had spent 23 years working for Oregon's Department of Human Services, building a reputation that transcended state boundaries. Child welfare agencies across the country sought her consultation on their most challenging cases, and her innovative intervention strategies had been adopted by social service departments from California to Maine. Vivian's office walls displayed the evidence of her extraordinary career: commendations from governors, awards from national child advocacy organizations, certificates of completion from advanced training programs, and hundreds of thank you letters from families whose lives she had transformed. But the most meaningful decoration was a simple framed photograph showing 37 children of various ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds, kids she had personally removed from dangerous situations and helped place in loving homes. Her expertise was built on an intuitive understanding of childhood trauma that seemed almost supernatural to her colleagues. Vivian could walk into a home and immediately sense the subtle signs of abuse or neglect that other social workers might miss. She noticed the way children positioned themselves relative to adults, the particular quality of silence that indicated fear rather than contentment, and the dozens of small behavioral indicators that revealed family dysfunction beneath surface appearances. Vivian's case files read like a catalog of successful interventions. The 8-year-old boy removed from a methamphetamine house who was now thriving in his adoptive family. The 3 sisters rescued from sexual abuse who had all graduated from college. The teenage girl pulled from a trafficking situation who was now studying social work herself. Her success rate was legendary: over 94% of the children she removed from dangerous homes remained safe and stable in their subsequent placements. Her professional methodology was meticulous and evidence-based. Vivian documented everything, interviewed multiple sources, and built comprehensive profiles of family dynamics before making intervention decisions. She had testified as an expert witness in over 150 court cases, and her recommendations were rarely challenged by judges who had learned to trust her judgment implicitly. But perhaps most remarkably, Vivian had managed to maintain this demanding career while raising her own daughter as a single mother. Autumn Hartley was 17 years old, academically gifted, and apparently well-adjusted despite the absence of her father, who had left when Autumn was 3 years old. Vivian had always viewed her ability to successfully parent while helping other families as validation of her professional expertise. Their home in suburban Portland was comfortable and well-organized, reflecting Vivian's belief that stability and structure were essential for healthy child development. Autumn had her own room filled with books, art supplies, and academic awards. The house was designed to be a sanctuary from the traumatic situations Vivian encountered professionally, a place where both mother and daughter could find peace and normalcy. Vivian's relationship with Autumn had always been close, built on mutual respect and open communication. They had regular family dinners where they discussed Autumn's school activities, college plans, and current events. Vivian made it a point to attend Autumn's debate tournaments, art exhibitions, and academic honors ceremonies, despite her demanding work schedule. To outside observers, The Hartley family represented the ideal outcome of thoughtful single parenting combined with professional expertise in child development. Vivian frequently spoke at conferences about balancing career demands with family responsibilities, and she was often cited as an example of how social workers could maintain healthy personal lives while working in such emotionally demanding fields. But this carefully constructed image was about to be shattered by a revelation that would force Vivian to confront the most painful irony of her career: the signs she missed. The first warning sign appeared on a Tuesday morning in October, though Vivian wouldn't recognize it as such until much later. Autumn had been getting ready for school when Vivian noticed that she was wearing a long-sleeved sweater despite the unseasonably warm weather. When Vivian commented on her choice of clothing, Autumn had simply said she was feeling cold and left for school without further explanation. Vivian filed the observation away without concern. Autumn had always been somewhat particular about her clothing choices, and Vivian respected her daughter's autonomy in making personal decisions. It never occurred to her to apply the same scrutiny to Autumn's behavior that she brought to her professional cases. The second sign came a week later when Vivian received a call from Autumn's guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, about some concerns regarding Autumn's recent academic performance. Autumn's grades had dropped from A's to C's over the previous month, and several teachers had noted that she seemed withdrawn and less engaged in classroom discussions. "I'm sure it's just the stress of senior year and college applications," Mrs. Patterson said during their phone conversation. "But I wanted to touch base with you since it's such a change from her usual performance." Vivian scheduled a meeting with Mrs. Patterson for the following week, but she wasn't particularly concerned. Academic fluctuations were normal for high school seniors, and Autumn had always been self-motivated about her education. Vivian assumed that once college applications were submitted, Autumn's stress levels would decrease and her grades would improve. During their family dinner that evening, Vivian mentioned the conversation with Mrs. Patterson and asked Autumn about her recent academic struggles. Autumn's response was dismissive but not defensive. "It's just been a rough month with all the college stress. I'll bring my grades back up." The explanation was reasonable, and Vivian accepted it without further questioning. If this conversation had been taking place during one of her professional home visits, Vivian would have probed deeper, asked follow-up questions, and observed Autumn's body language for signs of deception or distress. But in her own home, with her own daughter, Vivian's professional instincts were suppressed by her trust in their relationship and her assumption that Autumn would communicate openly about any serious problems. The third warning sign was more subtle, but potentially more significant. Vivian began noticing that Autumn was spending increasing amounts of time alone in her room, often with the door closed and music playing loudly enough to prevent conversation. When Vivian knocked to check on her, Autumn would quickly open the door but seemed slightly flustered, as if she had been interrupted in the middle of something she didn't want to share. Again, Vivian's interpretation was colored by her assumptions about normal teenage behavior. Privacy was important for adolescent development, and Autumn had always been respectful about house rules and family time. The increased isolation seemed consistent with the stress of senior year and the natural process of young adults beginning to separate from their parents. At Justice System USA, we explore the moments when expertise becomes a blind spot. If this story is making you question how well we really see the people closest to us, share it with someone who understands the complexity of family relationships. What Vivian failed to recognize was that these three observations, the clothing choices, academic decline, and social withdrawal, represented a classic pattern of adolescent depression and self-harm that she would have identified immediately in any of her professional cases. Her expertise in recognizing warning signs was so well developed that she had written training manuals on this exact topic, but her emotional investment in believing that Autumn was healthy and happy prevented her from applying her professional knowledge to her own family situation. The professional success. Ironically, during the same period when Autumn was struggling, Vivian was experiencing one of the most successful phases of her professional career. She had been selected to lead a high-profile task force on improving child welfare outcomes across Oregon, and her innovative approaches were being implemented statewide. The task force work required Vivian to travel frequently, conducting training sessions for social workers in rural counties and consulting on complex cases that local agencies couldn't handle independently. Her expertise was in such high demand that she was working 60-hour weeks and often returning home exhausted from the emotional intensity of her caseload. One particularly challenging case consumed much of Vivian's attention during the month of October. She was working with a family where a 15-year-old girl named Melissa had been engaging in self-harm behaviors that her parents had initially dismissed as attention-seeking. Vivian's intervention had potentially saved the girl's life by recognizing that her superficial cuts were actually practice for a more serious suicide attempt. Vivian's work with Melissa's family was both professionally rewarding and emotionally draining. She spent hours conducting interviews, coordinating therapy services, and developing a safety plan that would protect Melissa while preserving the family unit. The case required multiple home visits, family therapy sessions, and collaboration with mental health professionals. The success of Melissa's case reinforced Vivian's confidence in her ability to recognize and address adolescent mental health crises. She had identified warning signs that the girl's own parents had missed, implemented interventions that prevented a tragedy, and helped a family develop better communication patterns. The case became another example of Vivian's exceptional professional capabilities, but the irony was profound. While Vivian was working tirelessly to save a teenager who was engaging in self-harm behaviors, her own daughter was developing similar symptoms just 20 miles away in their home. The professional skills that made Vivian so effective with other families somehow didn't transfer to her relationship with Autumn. The demands of Vivian's career also meant that she was spending less time at home during this critical period. She would often leave for work before Autumn woke up and return home after Autumn had gone to bed. Their traditional family dinners became less frequent, and their conversations were often limited to brief exchanges about logistics and schedules. Vivian justified the reduced family time by focusing on the importance of her professional work and the families who depended on her expertise. She also trusted that Autumn was mature enough to handle increased independence, and she believed that their strong relationship foundation would weather this temporary period of limited availability. The escalation. November brought an escalation in both Vivian's professional responsibilities and Autumn's hidden crisis. Vivian was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee about federal funding for child welfare programs, an opportunity that represented the pinnacle of professional recognition in her field. The testimony required weeks of preparation, including research, writing, and coordination with other expert witnesses. Vivian spent many evenings and weekends working on her presentation, often in her home office while Autumn was studying in her own room. The parallel nature of their activities, both working quietly in separate parts of the house, reinforced Vivian's perception that everything was functioning normally. During the same period, Autumn's behavior began to change in ways that would have immediately triggered Vivian's professional alarm systems if she had been observing another family. Autumn's appetite decreased significantly, and she began wearing exclusively long-sleeved clothing even when the weather was warm. She became increasingly irritable during their limited interactions, and her responses to Vivian's questions became shorter and more evasive. Most significantly, Autumn began experiencing what appeared to be frequent minor injuries. She mentioned cutting her hand while washing dishes, burning her arm on the oven door, and bruising her wrist in a fall. Each injury was plausible as an isolated incident, but the pattern of frequent, unexplained injuries to areas typically covered by clothing should have raised serious concerns about self-harm. Vivian's response to each reported injury was appropriately caring, but not investigative. She provided first aid, expressed concern about Autumn's clumsiness, and suggested that stress might be affecting her coordination. It never occurred to Vivian to examine the injuries more closely or to question whether they might be intentionally self-inflicted. The most telling incident occurred when Vivian discovered several bloody tissues in Autumn's bathroom trash can. When she asked Autumn about them, Autumn explained that she had been having frequent nosebleeds due to the dry winter air. Vivian accepted this explanation and even purchased a humidifier for Autumn's room to address the supposed problem. In her professional life, Vivian would have recognized bloody tissues as a potential indicator of self-harm, especially in the context of other warning signs. She would have asked detailed questions, examined the pattern of bleeding, and possibly requested a medical evaluation. But in her personal life, her trust in Autumn's explanations and her desire to respect her daughter's privacy prevented her from conducting the type of thorough investigation that had made her so successful professionally. The congressional testimony. Vivian's testimony before Congress took place on a Wednesday morning in early December. She spoke passionately about the importance of early intervention in child welfare cases, emphasizing how trained professionals could recognize warning signs that family members and other adults might miss. The most dangerous assumption we can make, Vivian told the subcommittee, that children will clearly communicate when they are in crisis. Most at-risk children have learned to hide their distress, to present a facade of normalcy while they are actually suffering tremendously. It is our responsibility as professionals to look beyond surface appearances and recognize the subtle indicators that a child needs help. Her testimony was well received and widely covered in social work publications and mainstream media. Vivian was praised for her articulate advocacy and her practical insights into improving child protection systems. The exposure elevated her national profile and led to additional speaking opportunities and consulting requests. But as Vivian delivered her testimony about the importance of recognizing hidden distress in children, Autumn was sitting in her high-school bathroom during lunch period, using a razor blade to cut shallow lines across her forearm. The cutting provided temporary relief from the emotional pain that had been building for months, pain that she couldn't articulate to herself, much less to her accomplished mother, who seemed to have answers for everyone else's problems. The timing was cruelly ironic. While Vivian was being celebrated for her expertise in identifying children in crisis, her own daughter was engaging in the exact behaviors that Vivian's professional training had taught her to recognize and address. The night everything changed. December 18th was supposed to be a celebration. Vivian had returned from her congressional testimony to find that she had been selected as Oregon's Social Worker of the Year, an honor that would be presented at a ceremony in January. She had also received confirmation that her task force recommendations would be implemented statewide, potentially improving outcomes for thousands of children. Vivian decided to surprise Autumn with her favorite dinner, homemade lasagna with garlic bread, and planned to share the good news about her professional recognition. She arrived home earlier than usual, grocery bags in hand, excited to spend a relaxing evening with her daughter. The house was quiet when Vivian entered, which wasn't unusual since Autumn often did homework with headphones on. Vivian began preparing dinner, occasionally calling upstairs to let Autumn know that they would be eating earlier than usual. When Autumn didn't respond after several attempts, Vivian assumed she was deeply focused on studying and decided to go upstairs to tell her about dinner in person. Vivian knocked on Autumn's bedroom door and received no response. She knocked again, more loudly, and called Autumn's name. Still no answer. Concerned that Autumn might be wearing headphones or taking a nap, Vivian tried the door handle and found it locked. This was unusual. While Autumn valued her privacy, she rarely locked her bedroom door, and she had always responded to Vivian's knocks in the past. Vivian's professional instincts finally began to activate, though she tried to suppress the anxiety that was building in her chest. "Autumn, honey, I'm coming in. I need to make sure you're okay." Vivian used the key she kept for emergencies to unlock Autumn's door. The room was empty, but she could hear water running in Autumn's private bathroom. Vivian knocked on the bathroom door and called Autumn's name again. The water continued running, but there was no verbal response. When Vivian tried the bathroom door, it was also locked. Now genuinely alarmed, she called out more urgently, "Autumn, please answer me. I need to know that you're okay." The silence that followed was the kind that Vivian had learned to recognize in her professional work, the silence that indicated something was seriously wrong. She had felt the same intuitive alarm during home visits when children were in immediate danger, but experiencing it in her own home was disorienting and terrifying. Vivian forced the bathroom door open and found Autumn unconscious in the bathtub, the water running red with blood from deep cuts across both wrists. A razor blade lay on the edge of the tub, and several empty pill bottles were scattered on the bathroom floor. The emergency. The next several hours passed in a blur of emergency medical procedures, police interviews, and psychiatric evaluations. Paramedics worked to stabilize Autumn while transporting her to the hospital, and Vivian rode in the ambulance watching her daughter's pale face while medical personnel assessed the severity of her suicide attempt. At the hospital, emergency room doctors determined that Autumn had lost a significant amount of blood, but that her injuries were not immediately life-threatening. However, the combination of cutting and pill consumption indicated a serious suicide attempt rather than a gesture or cry for help. Autumn was admitted to the psychiatric ward for medical stabilization and mental health evaluation. During the initial psychiatric interview, details emerged about Autumn's emotional state that shocked Vivian with their familiarity. Autumn described feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness, and disconnection that had been building for months. She talked about feeling like a burden to her mother, whose important work helping other families made Autumn feel selfish for having any problems of her own. Most painfully, Autumn revealed that she had been engaging in self-harm behaviors for several months, using cutting as a way to cope with emotional distress that she couldn't express verbally. The minor injuries that Vivian had attributed to clumsiness were actually evidence of escalating self-destructive behavior. "I didn't know how to tell her," Autumn explained to the psychiatrist while Vivian listened through tears. "She's so good at helping other kids with their problems. I felt like I should be able to handle my own problems without bothering her. And she's always so busy with work. I didn't want to add to her stress." The psychiatrist's questions revealed a pattern of depression, anxiety, and social isolation that had been developing throughout Autumn's senior year. The college application process had triggered intense pressure and self-doubt, but Autumn had felt unable to discuss these feelings with her mother because of Vivian's professional identity as someone who helped families cope with much more serious problems. The professional reckoning. As Vivian sat in the psychiatric ward waiting room while Autumn underwent evaluation, she experienced a psychological reckoning that challenged everything she believed about her professional capabilities and personal judgment. The child welfare expert who had built her career on recognizing signs of distress in children had completely missed those same signs in her own daughter. Reviewing Autumn's behavior over the previous months, Vivian could now see the clear pattern of warning signs that should have triggered immediate intervention. The clothing choices, academic decline, social withdrawal, appetite changes, frequent injuries, and bloody tissues were a textbook presentation of adolescent depression and self-harm. Vivian had literally written the training materials that described these exact symptoms. The irony was devastating. While Vivian had been traveling the country teaching other professionals how to recognize children in crisis, her own child had been crying out for help in ways that Vivian's expertise should have made impossible to miss. The same observational skills that had saved hundreds of other children had somehow been disabled when it came to the person who mattered most. Vivian began to understand how her professional identity had created blind spots in her personal relationships. Her confidence in her ability to maintain a healthy family while managing a demanding career had made her assume that any problems Autumn experienced would be obvious and manageable. Her expertise had become a source of overconfidence rather than enhanced awareness. Moreover, Vivian realized that her professional schedule and emotional investment in other families' problems had reduced her availability to her own daughter. During a critical period, while she had been providing intensive support to teenagers like Melissa, Autumn had been struggling alone with similar issues just 20 miles away. The guilt was overwhelming, but it was also accompanied by a more complex emotion: professional humiliation. Vivian's entire identity was built on her ability to protect children and recognize when they needed help. Her failure to recognize Autumn's crisis wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a fundamental challenge to her professional competence. The recovery process. Autumn's treatment required a 3-week inpatient psychiatric hospitalization followed by months of outpatient therapy. During this period, Vivian was forced to confront not only Autumn's mental health needs, but also her own role in creating the family dynamics that had contributed to the crisis. Family therapy sessions revealed that Autumn had been struggling with depression and anxiety for much longer than Vivian had realized. The pressure of being the daughter of a professional who helped troubled families had created an expectation that Autumn should be able to handle her own problems independently. Autumn had internalized the message that seeking help was a sign of weakness, especially for someone whose mother was an expert in providing help to others. Dr. Patricia Reyes, the family therapist, helped Vivian understand how her professional identity had inadvertently created barriers to communication with Autumn. When you're known for being able to fix other families' problems, Dr. Reyes explained, it can be very difficult for your own family members to admit that they need help. They may feel like they're disappointing you or proving that you're not as competent as everyone believes. The therapy process also revealed that Vivian's demanding work schedule had sent unintended messages about priorities. While Vivian viewed her professional work as a way to help families like her own, Autumn had interpreted her mother's frequent travel and long hours as evidence that other families' needs were more important than her own. I felt like I was competing with your clients for your attention, Autumn explained during one particularly difficult session, and they always seemed to win because they had bigger problems than mine. Vivian had to learn new ways of communicating with Autumn that separated her role as a mother from her identity as a professional helper. This meant asking direct questions about Autumn's emotional state, creating space for difficulties without immediately moving into problem-solving mode, and demonstrating that her relationship with Autumn was more important than any professional obligation. The career consequences. News of Autumn's suicide attempt and Vivian's failure to recognize the warning signs began to circulate within Oregon's social work community, despite Vivian's efforts to maintain privacy. The irony of the situation: a renowned child protection expert missing signs of crisis in her own home generated both sympathy and professional skepticism. Some colleagues offered understanding and support, recognizing that the demands of social work could create blind spots in practitioners' personal lives. But others questioned whether someone who had failed to protect her own child should continue to be trusted with other families' welfare. The Oregon Department of Human Services conducted a review of Vivian's recent cases to determine whether her personal situation had affected her professional judgment. While the review found no evidence of compromised decision-making in her work with other families, several clients expressed concern about continuing to work with someone who had missed such clear warning signs in her own home. Vivian speaking engagements and consulting opportunities were quietly reduced as word spread about her personal situation. The congressional testimony that had elevated her national profile now seemed ironic and potentially hypocritical. Several training contracts were canceled, and Vivian was removed from the task force leadership position she had worked years to achieve. The professional consequences were painful, but also provided perspective on what truly mattered. Vivian realized that she had been more invested in her professional reputation than in the day-to-day reality of her relationship with Autumn. The career setbacks forced her to reevaluate her priorities and commitment to her family. The new understanding. 6 months after Autumn's suicide attempt, Vivian made the difficult decision to reduce her professional responsibilities significantly. She resigned from her leadership positions, declined most speaking engagements, and transitioned to a part-time caseload that allowed her to be home every evening for dinner with Autumn. The adjustment was financially and emotionally challenging. Vivian's identity had been so closely tied to her professional achievements that stepping back felt like a form of personal failure. But she also discovered that being present for Autumn's recovery process provided a different kind of satisfaction than professional recognition had offered. Autumn's healing was gradual and sometimes set back by periods of depression and anxiety. But the family therapy process had opened communication channels that had never existed before, and Vivian learned to recognize and respond to Autumn's emotional needs in ways that honored her role as a mother rather than her expertise as a professional. Most significant change was Vivian's willingness to admit uncertainty and seek help. Previously, her professional confidence had made it difficult to acknowledge when she didn't know how to handle a situation. Now, she regularly consulted with Dr. Reyes about parenting decisions and approached her relationship with Autumn with humility rather than assumed expertise. At Justice System USA, we believe that the most important lessons often come from our greatest failures. Vivian Hartley's story reminds us that expertise in one area doesn't automatically transfer to other relationships, and that sometimes the people closest to us are the hardest to see clearly. The ongoing recovery years after the crisis, Autumn had graduated from high school and was thriving as a freshman at a college 3 hours from home. Her recovery included ongoing therapy and medication management, but she had developed healthy coping strategies and a strong support network of friends and mentors. The distance of college had been good for both Autumn and Vivian, allowing them to maintain their improved relationship while giving Autumn space to develop independence. They talked several times a week, and Autumn felt comfortable sharing both successes and struggles with her mother without fear of triggering professional problem-solving mode. Vivian had slowly begun to rebuild her professional reputation, but with a different focus. She now specialized in working with families where parents' professional identities created barriers to effective family functioning. Her personal experience had given her unique insights into how expertise could become a liability in intimate relationships. She also began speaking openly about her failure to recognize Autumn's crisis, using her experience as a cautionary tale. For other social workers and helping professionals, the presentations were humbling but ultimately more impactful than her previous talks about successful interventions. I spent 23 years teaching people how to recognize when children are in crisis, Vivian would tell audiences. But when my own daughter was drowning, I couldn't see past my assumptions about what a healthy family looked like. Sometimes the most dangerous thing we can have is confidence in our own expertise. The final lesson. Vivian's story serves as a reminder that professional competence and personal wisdom are not the same thing. Her expertise in child welfare had made her extraordinarily effective at helping other families, but it had also created blind spots that nearly cost her the most important relationship in her life. The most difficult aspect of Vivian's experience was accepting that her professional identity had become a barrier to authentic connection with her daughter. The skills that made her successful in her career, analytical thinking, problem-solving focus, and emotional distance, were counterproductive in her role as a mother. But Vivian's willingness to acknowledge her failure and learn from it ultimately strengthened both her personal relationships and her professional effectiveness. She discovered that admitting uncertainty and seeking help were signs of wisdom rather than weakness, and that vulnerability could be a source of connection rather than professional liability. Autumn's recovery taught both mother and daughter that love and expertise are not the same thing, and that sometimes the most helpful thing a professional can do is to set aside their expertise and simply be present as a human being. Today, Vivian continues to work in child welfare, but with a different understanding of the limits of professional knowledge and the importance of humility in relationships with both clients and family members. Her experience has made her a better social worker and a better mother. Though the cost of that education was nearly unbearable, the scar on Autumn's wrist serves as a permanent reminder of how close they came to losing each other and how much work it takes to truly see the people we love most. This has been Justice System USA, where we explore the human complexities behind the systems designed to protect us. Dr. Vivian Hartley's story reminds us that expertise can be both a gift and a barrier, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is admit what we don't know. What did you think about Vivian's journey from professional confidence to personal humility? Have you ever experienced a situation where your expertise created blind spots in your personal relationships? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what city you're watching from. If this story challenged your assumptions about the relationship between professional competence and personal wisdom, hit that like button, share it with someone who works in helping professions, and subscribe to Justice System USA for more stories that explore the complexity of human relationships. Remember, the people closest to us often need us to be human, first, and expert, second. Sometimes the most professional thing we can do is admit we don't have all the answers. Until next time, listen with your heart, not just your training. See you in the next story.